Thank you for joining us today for a webinar. The webinar topic being screen printing pricing in 3 not so easy steps. So before we get started, say hello, Tom.
Hello, everybody. This is Tom.
Just want to tell everybody to feel free to drop in your questions in the chat box. You should be able to see a chat function in the webinar in the GoToWebinar menu. And at the end, Tommy will actually be able to go through your questions for our Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go along. But at the end, Tommy will also be available to take any new questions at that time. But without further ado, Tommy, take it away.
Okay, everybody. Just a quick background. I've been in the decorating business since 1987. So I've been through making homemade presses to scraping money together and be able to buy equipment and so forth. So probably like a lot of you, it's unfortunately a lot of us might have started undercapitalized, and you got to build that capital to expand. And as I grew that business, was able to end up with 8 automatic presses in a large facility, top-notch equipment, all those things that you do as you grow your business and try to be efficient, because that's the name of the game with screen printing, is efficiency, to be profitable. Along the way, I also was always trying to build a great order management system, and a lot of that required, eventually I learned how to do some coding just to make my own software. I wasn't happy with what I was finding in the industry. Fast forward all the way to 2010, that's when I found DecoNetwork. And then I completely immersed myself in that. And anyone who's been with Deco potentially that long might know it was a lot more archaic at that point. It is unbelievable how much it's developed in that time, and the production and capabilities, not just websites, but really the back end where you can manage your orders and set up your pricing and so forth, which is what we're really going to dig into today. So that kind of led to it being in this business for some 30 years now. I got so involved with Deco and so tight with everybody at DecoNetwork that we came up with an idea that started a year ago, and that was to be able to provide a service which is called Deco Pro. So what is Deco Pro? Deco Pro, just half-kiddingly, is my retirement plan. For those of you who've been screen printing for a while, you think, am I going to do this forever? Well, I am. I still have screen printing, and I pretty much rely on my partner to manage most of that. And I actually still get in and use the system for quotes and so forth, but primarily focused on helping other people, for anything from setting up their whole pricing for fulfillment centers, workarounds that might be too difficult to figure out on your own, setting up the price grids, general consulting. Basically what a Deco Pro is there for is to be your hired gun just when you need it. And the things to consider for that are you got to remember, DecoNetwork, I'm sure if you're using DecoNetwork, you know it's a very robust system. To the dismay of many people, they find out that, hey, it just doesn't just automatically start doing everything for you. If you think about it, it's impossible. You have to set up your price tables, how you want to price things, and so forth. And there's just a lot to go through. So sometimes the Deco Pro can be there just to hold your hand and get you through those steps and cut that time down to 10%. Literally, because I know how to do it, or a Deco Pro knows how to do that, you save a lot of time by not having, I have a lot of customers who spent 6 months, 12 months, and never got anything set up because they just can't find the time. They're so busy trying to get orders shipped out. So that's where Deco Pro comes in. It's a separate service. It's a paid service. I'm an independent contractor. But beyond what you get from support, it's like having someone who in your building, except remotely, in most cases, that can help you get through those critical steps, whatever it might be. With that said, let's move on to pricing. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to determine your costs. Well, we're not going to determine your costs, but we're going to cover determining your costs, about knowing the competition, setting a price strategy. And then we're going to have some bonus tips at the end for people either interested or using DecoNetwork as far as covering your bases with pricing. And it might be just some tips, some things that help you to analyze how you have your pricing set up and might be some quick tricks that'll help you out. And I want you to stay tuned to the end, because that's when we'll be doing some questions and answers. And I'll try to go through this the best I can and respond to them. We'll see what we got there at the end. So let's move on, and let's talk about determining your costs. Again, I've been screen printing for 30 years, and that doesn't mean I have all the perfect answers, but I've done a lot, including been very successful printing some 3 million pieces a year, very profitable. Screen printing, but not a big, but you got to be profitable when you've got maybe only one press and you're printing 100,000 pieces a year, or maybe you're printing less than that. And those are the things you have to consider in pricing. Are you a volume shop, or is it, are you going to be small, and then how are you going to make profit in that? And you got to look at your costs. Over the years, we've done some incredible efficiency and quality things, winning a ton of SCI awards and impressions awards with some of my older companies. And really, we couldn't get to that point without being efficient and profitable. So it's really painful to know you have all these huge operating costs, your building, your rent, your machines, and not really having a plan on how you're going to cover those. I've had friends in the business or customers that I work with, and it's very common to kind of really just look at what the competition's doing and say, okay, I got a price like that to be competitive. And certainly that is one aspect of it. But I would never want to set my pricing without knowing what my costs are and trying to set and then build my sale prices off of those costs and then do those comparisons. Because the truth is, you might not be able to compete with what you're looking at, and as far as price. So you might have to get your pricing as close as you can, but you got to remain profitable and then look at other avenues to compete where you have an added benefit, which we'll get into, whether that's free shipping or something else. So what we're going to end up going into here is, I hate to say it, kind of a boring spreadsheet. And we're going to look at determining your hourly rate, your material costs, analyzing your production output, and then applying that data to a price matrix. So I'm going to click to a spreadsheet I set up. And this is, first we'll just go through each little section here. And again, remember, this is, you can take what you learn from this, or maybe you're already doing something similar, and massage it and find a different way or a different approach. I'm just trying to get across the key here is for screen printing is you got to come up with an hourly rate, and you got to know your material costs, and then you got to be able to plug that into pricing somehow. So I broke this apart into, again, I don't know if the size of your shops, but it would apply to anything. In this case, I'm kind of looking at a scenario with 2 automatic presses. And we got to list our wages. So I've listed wages. We've got management. We've got some office workers. If you've got, this is a pretty simplified version. This is assuming that everybody in the office makes the same wages and so forth, and everybody in production makes the same $15 per hour. There could be people, you probably have varying rates depending on what they're doing, if they're an operator or a folder and so forth. Bottom line is I look at things annually. So you have 2,080 hours in a year. And it's certainly, I got to be honest, easier to do pricing when you have some history, whether it's only a year's history. When you start getting into 5, 10 years of history, you have lots of data to work with. But I always reanalyze pricing for the new year based off of the previous year. So if you're just getting started, you got to plug in what you know now, and you can come up with an hourly rate based off of what you're paying everybody. I'm not going to get into exactly the formulas, but it's basically, I'm listing all those wages, coming up with an hourly rate, so you've got your annual income, but per hour to cover everybody, in this example, it's $148 or $150, rounding up. Then you've got your overhead, which you also got to figure out. So you've got utilities, you've got your building perhaps, and I broke it out, rent, maintenance. I'm sure I did not cover everything here, and you want to cover everything. That's just, look at your financials and your bank statements. I've got in here some press, like lease payments or perhaps you have a loan payment. Don't want you to think about amortized costs here. I want you to think about cash flow. What is the nut that you pay every month? So if you have a $500 payment or a $300 payment or a $1,000 payment for equipment, whatever it is, that's what you want to plug in here, because that's really what you really got to make sure you cover. You know, your exposure equipment, computers, basically everything that you're going to be paying for that's going to be in your overhead. And I even put in the little UPS daily pickup. There's a rate you pay for that. So everything that you got in your overhead. So you've got your two figures there that come up that I'm going to be using for a total to come up with an hourly. And then you've got your determine your material cost. Now this is separate from the hourly rate or your overhead, your fixed, basically fixed cost. And there's a couple ways to approach this, but basically, again, if you're starting from scratch, it's a lot harder to determine. When you have some history, you can see what are you paying for supplies in the office, and what do you. And yes, by the way, if anyone was thinking, I want to cover everything in production. That's where the money's made. When that press turns, that's going to bring in money to cover the office, shipping, the whole 9 yards. I want to pay for my shipping and receiving people with what's made off a press. Now, it doesn't mean you can't break that out and try and cover it in your shipping charges, but the way I approach it is I want to cover everybody when that press turns. So you got your mesh, your emulsion, miscellaneous supplies, ink. You know, that's everything. Scrapers, sprayway, adhesives, the whole 9 yards. Now, how much do you use of that in a year, and how do you kind of apply it to the job? That's where there are a couple different methods. I look at it like, okay, what did we do last year, and how much should we spend? Now, if I have some extra ink on the shelf and I have some extra sprayway cans, that's fine. I'm still going to cover it, because it's if you really nitpick that much, you're not, you know, it's not even a penny. You're never going to come up with that overflow. The other thing you can do is try to build out your material costs by the job. So for instance, if you know a gallon of ink has a general coverage of 1,000 shirts for 12 by 12 area, I believe if you do the math, I've done this approach as well, it's 3 to 5 cents a shirt, whatever that is. You can come up with what ink is coverage based off of that data, how much product you use and materials. I just found over time it was actually more accurate and much easier to look at how much we actually bought and then come up with a rate. So how did I come up with this 7 cents per unit? Well, that's by analyzing our output, which again, if you're new to the business or just starting, it's a little bit more difficult without some kind of history. But this 7 cents has taken this you know, almost $55,000, and it's dividing that by what this scenario did, 750,000 pieces. So that was assuming that, okay, these materials were needed to do that many pieces. Then you've got, if I'm analyzing my production output, in this little scenario, I'm looking at the previous year. Now I like to throw in a potential. And this potential is based off of, okay, I got 2 automatic presses. They average 500 pieces per hour. I know that presses can run 1,000 pieces an hour, but it's still a good number. Even with the faster machines today, I think it's still reliable and consistent. And that includes downtime. So it actually, in an hour, nets 500, even with stopping to fill a pinhole and so forth. Again, this is all based off of 2,080 hours per year. So this does not account for overhead. And I'm sorry, overtime. And a quick side note on overtime. I've done both scenarios where I've tried to factor in some estimates on overtime. I found in the long run, I didn't need to factor in overtime because, quite frankly, once that first shift or the 40 hours is covered with the rates I build, overtime's gravy. In theory, you don't even need to charge extra, but there are things that you might have. Plus, why not make a little bit more money with a rush charge and so forth? And there's, you know, lots of ways to look at the overtime, but enough on that. So then I look at what we actually did. Okay, we did 750,000. Now that seems like a huge disparity, but actually, with experience, it's not. I can certainly improve that, but I'm not surprised because if you're printing now, you realize that that press is not always turning. There's lots of downtime and setup time. Excuse me, throat's drying up here. So our actual in this scenario was we were outputting 361 pieces per hour. So I took a look and I said, I want to actually improve that, and I set up the target. I think we could improve that. The potential is obviously not going to happen. But I based this off of, okay, we can get 500 pieces an hour, but let's just see if we can improve this year and get our output to be, remember, this is on 2 presses. So this is up, this figure here was 361. That's actually about 180 per press. Here I'm looking at bumping it up to 312. I think from experience, a very doable target by improving our production system. Sometimes just how we use our labor, mostly how we use our labor. And so that gives me a unit cost of 35 cents. And then I plug in those materials that I had over here of 7 cents. I have 42 cents based off my new scenario to cover. Now, if I have the same output as I did the previous year, I need 68 cents. Now, that's a huge, again, looks like a big disparity. That's how much some simple improvements production can improve your bottom line. That said, that's probably a whole other seminar. It is a whole other seminar talking about how to do that. But for instance, if your people are standing around waiting for someone to set up a press, can you be speeding up by having all the materials there in advance? Sometimes having a float or an extra person, that person at 10, 15 bucks an hour can save you 20% production time by keeping those presses rolling, for instance. So anyhow, I've now basically got my per unit cost, and I can start building my price matrix. So now I've got my data, and I also know the key factor here is I got to cover setup time. So here I've got my press rate, 500 pieces per hour, and I've taken this, I'm just pulling data from everything I built here, and I've got an hourly rate of 176 here to cover, which gives me a unit price of 22 cents. Now, in my spreadsheet here, I can change this. So if I'm going to say, hey, it's going to be 300, okay, or if I want to use that value I had, my goal of 312, plug in 312, and that's going to adjust. There's that 35 cents with the 40 cents of materials that I got to cover. But key here is I got to factor in setup time, because that's one mistake I see a lot of people make is they say, hey, I can print 500, or, hey, my press output 750 pieces an hour, and at that rate I can charge 25 cents and we'll be making tons of money. Well, the reality is you're probably not going to net 750 pieces per hour when you consider all the things that can cause downtime. Although from experience, we did net on our 8 presses about 750 an hour in optimum times, and that was having always a floater, keeping the thing inked, having materials always at the press, and so forth. There are things you can do to truly net. I'm not as concerned about what the press is rated at. That's neither here nor there. The bottom line is the appreciated output is how you work with your labor and your system. So that said, you got to cover that overtime. So you're never going to, unless you've got a job that just runs for the whole year, the reality is you're setting up and tearing down a press. So what I did was, taking that same hourly rate, I plugged in the number. Now, I've still to this day like 15 minutes per color. Even with registration systems where you can set up a 6-color design in 10, 12 minutes, you still got to read a ticket. You still got to tweak it. If you're like shops that I run, you have a manager approve the print before you actually start producing the shirts, all those things. So this number is what works for you. You got to figure that out, and you might want to do a time analysis. How much, on average, take a 1-color job, a 6-color job, how long does it take from the moment you go to the job to actually be printing and producing products? All that time you want to cover. So I believe in figuring out, because it works with pricing, what it is per color. If you figure it's, okay, 5 minutes per color, but there's always 15 minutes just to gear up, then you restructure this so that you figure in that flat rate that's call it the minimum for every job, and then you add on for each additional color. I've always just run off of basing it per color, and that gives me a setup rate. So what my spreadsheet does, it looks up and it says, okay, for one color at 12 pieces, I'm going to, for each 12, it's going to be 42 cents, but plus I got to amortize in this 27 for setup. So this formula here is doing that. It's saying, okay, $27.19 divided by 12 pieces plus the 42 cents. As you can see, and this surprises people quite often, is at 12 pieces, this 42 cents is nothing. It's all that labor to set up the press that's mostly in there. And then, of course, as you go to each quantity break, that price drops because it's this $27 per color is just amortized over that many more pieces. And you just do that like in kind across the board. So it's 6 colors. Obviously, it's got to factor in this rate times, you know, that many colors and so forth. And then that unit rate of 42 cents really isn't changing, because I've always covered, you know, you can get crazy and try to cover ink for a left chest versus a full front. When it's like pennies, I don't advise that. Just it's based, because really your press runs, yes, you can shorten the chopper cylinder and so forth, but in reality, it's a lot easier to build your price structure on one stroke, the whole thing, and the ink is, in my opinion, ink is cheap when you look at labor. It's all labor. Then the last thing you're doing is you're taking your cost matrix and you're applying a margin. Now, whether contract screen printing, this is critical. That's where you make all your money. And yes, I've done a lot of that. But the other thing is even if you really are, if you're selling business to business or business to consumer, and it's not wholesale, and it's about the shirt and you make money at markup on the shirt, that's all well and good. You still should be profitable. In theory, if you never sold a shirt and every shirt came to you, that screen printing department should be profitable. Then your markup on the shirt can be nominal or whatever you feel you can capture, and that's extra profit. Now that might cover some administrative costs, obviously purchasing and so forth. You might want to find a mix between the two about being how you blend in the profit of your shirt with screen printing. But I've always felt that if I'm making money on printing, then I'm in good shape, and then I can actually work pretty low on the margin of the shirt. This is really what controls our pricing strategy. So what we did here is we just said, oh, we're going to make a 30% profit margin. Not markup. I'm sure most of you know the difference between a markup, and basically profit margin is what percentage of the final sale price am I going to keep? So in this case, it's 30%. So there's a formula to do that. I won't get into that. You can figure that out. But basically, it's just taking this whole price grid up here above and marking it up so that it has a 30% profit margin. Now I have a price sheet to look at. You know, you can set up rounding. Maybe you want to work in, to round it to the nickel and so forth. But that's how I come up with basically a price sheet. And now I've got this where I can start doing scenarios. So I've got spreadsheets that got 12 different variations. Let's look at it with a 35% margin. Some people want to adjust it so that the margin is lower on the higher quantities. Again, that's all in how you want to control your business, or perhaps it's how you got to structure to compete with your main competitors. I have mostly stuck with the same margin across the board, sometimes bumping up here, because even though the theory seems accurate, the truth is these small orders, they still take as much time to process in customer service and so forth. And I might say, hey, I want to make 50% on 12 to 24 pieces. So of course you could build out your spreadsheet to change that. So I'm sure there's probably lots of questions on that. I hope it came across as pretty understandable. Really, then that the key point here is you got to get your fixed costs, wages, and all your overhead, and break it down into an hourly. You got to determine what your material costs are. And then you got to be able to break that down into a unit based on either some kind of estimate or some kind of history. And then you need to have some realistic goals of what you're going to be able to get for press rates and what your setup times are. and then you got to be able to build that out into a matrix that you can then apply a markup to. One thing I do want to note that I think I forgot to mention, and that was as far as the matrix, and now I'm losing my thought of what it was that just came across my head. I am human. Sorry about that. This stuff even confuses me after 30 years. I'm going to come back to it if it comes back to me. It wasn't super critical, but it was basically about the analyzing your output, and it was just a little tidbit. So if I think of it, I'll come back to it. Now let's get back to where we're here. So we're going to, now we got our costs, we want to kind of get an idea what's the competition doing. Now I'm using custom ink because over and over again, including myself, I've looked up what does custom ink sell. If you're not aware, custom ink's not the cheapest in the industry by any means. So in that respect, I think it's a great analysis, even if it's not what you consider your main competition, because they are very successful. They're very well priced, they're competitive, but yet they don't give it away, and they're making money. So it's a great example. You're also going to want, of course, probably look at your local competition. And if you don't know who that is, you got to find out who that is and how you're going to get their pricing. Well, there's all kinds of strategies for that. I won't go into depth about that, but you might need to do some secret shopping, talk to your potential or existing clients and get their feedback. A lot of your competition, particularly in the contract business, it's pretty easy to obtain what their contract price lists are. And I don't consider that unethical. I mean, that's what we all have to do. How do you know your competition unless you know how they're pricing? So you're going to have to look at that. I'm going to get into using custom ink as an example, and you might do what we're about to go into here and build this with several of your competitors to try and find the best analysis of what your total competition is doing. So first, in this example, I go to the custom ink website, and I use maybe this example here as a starting point. I'm going to probably compare several different products, but I'm just going to go into their designer and, you know, add an imprint. I won't take too much time on this. Let's just say we add a piece of art. I don't know. And then you can go get a price, start plugging in quantities. You can change how many colors the imprint is, and you know, just like our designers in DecoNetwork, and start taking the values. And you know, and when you run in this example, okay, you got to put in your area code, of course. And okay, I know they're charging $12.16 each for a quantity of 12. So I created another spreadsheet and basically took this Gildan 2000 product in white and black, and I grabbed pricing from them for several quantities. I went from, I just matched the breaks in my scenario here, 12, 20.
Hey, Tom, you still there? I lost your audio.
I'm here. Where did we leave up?
There we go. We lost your audio for a second, but glad to have you back. I think you were only on for about 10 seconds.
Okay. All right. So basically I'm pulling that data that I did from the custom ink or whatever the competition is. I'm going to list all my different competitors and just do several scenarios. And this can get very elaborate if you want to, and you know, I'll end up with all kinds of tabs down here for all your competitors. But in this case, I got one. I'm just looking at one product, white and black, with quantities that match how I've got my quantities set up. And I've got a one color front, I've got a one color front and back, and a two color front. And of course, you can keep building all kinds of scenarios, but you're just trying to get an idea and see what your competition is doing for that product, and then compare it with your own. Now remember, I think this is probably what I cut out of the audio, as that custom ink in this example it's all inclusive pricing. So there's no shipping costs and there's no setup costs when you look at their pricing. So even though your pricing might come out less, you still got to factor that in, or maybe you're going to factor in your shipping, which we'll get into a little bit later. You have to consider that in your analysis, and of course, your local competition, same thing. So all I did was build the same product, and I just built a column and said, okay, that shirt cost me this for $2.10 for a dark and $1.84. I'm going to mark up. I'm going to start with marking up my product times 2, and then I have in these tabs here, I actually have it looking up my marked up sale price at $368, and then it's going back over to, I created a tab here with my screen printing prices that I created initially way back here and came up with my price sheet, and I have a copy here and it's referring to that. So I might determine that all I got to do is play with the markup of the shirt with my decorating that I'm happy with to see where that comparison comes out to. I might determine that, hey, I want to actually adjust my print prices, and I'll go play with those numbers and tweak things around. I can tell you this, after doing this for decades, you start messing around so much. You get a rhythm, and you find out what works, and it's usually, it is a lot easier. And you also find out you don't have to be perfect across the board as long as you're super competitive and you have a good reputation and happy customers. But that said, you're going to want to build this analysis, and we still do this. We revisit it ourselves just to see where we're at. People change their pricing, including custom ink, I would imagine. So you build out a spreadsheet with that. Then you've got your local competition, you do the same thing. But there's really not much more to it than that. You got to build the scenarios and compare it with your own and see where you're at and then make adjustments. So next, make sure we're in the right one here. Yeah. We want to talk about setting up a price strategy. So is it going to be meet or beat the competition? You know, I know that sounds trite because we've all heard that one. But you do want to think, if you want to be, you know, is it okay just to be a little bit higher or right in line with them because you just have a killer service and people like working with you? And sometimes it's just people literally like the owner or the staff that, you know, because they treat them right. Those are things to consider. Now, if you're comparing with someone like Custom Ink, in general, their service is spectacular. So you don't necessarily have an edge there. So, but again, I should go back to that. Sorry, close that out. I got to open this up again. I didn't really go through this, but when I plugged in our numbers, although there are fake numbers, it's not real, but they're not pulled out of a hat. They're using some kind of typical scenarios. I looked at some of our old histories. We're lower than Custom Ink across the board here. Now, of course, you got shipping and so forth, but Custom Ink, I don't think is that difficult to compete with per se. That doesn't mean it won't be with your local competition. That's usually where it gets tougher. But that said, if you can be a little bit lower and still have that stellar competition and you're easy to work with, that's a competitive edge. Like Custom Ink does, and maybe your local competition doesn't. Do you want to factor in your setup charges? Shipping's a lot tougher, but setup charges, that's not so difficult. Everybody, oh yeah, they want to get their $10, $12, $25 per screen setup charge. Well, if you go back to where I built the cost, you really look at it, you don't need to if you know what your costs are, and you're covering, and those material costs are covering film, covering all your labor. In theory, you're really covered for your setup charges. That said, you might want to say, well, I still want to factor in $10, and just like I earlier amortized the actual labor to set up a press, you can amortize in that set up of $10 in expenses, so that across the board. Now, it's always going to make your 12-piece or even your 24-piece, it's going to bump it up a little bit. It becomes negligible when you get into higher quantities because it's like pennies. But that is not a difficult thing to do, and it's worth exploring when you play with your pricing of just getting rid of setup charges. And then there's another benefit to that, by the way. Not sure what system you're using. If you're using DecoNetwork, you can still have it display setup charges on the invoices, and you just tell the system that your setup charge is 0. So now they got 6 screens on the invoice, but for no charge. So that's just kind of a little marketing benefit, or you just don't apply a setup charge whatsoever. But the other benefit is internally, you don't have to worry about calculating that. Even though the example I bring up with DecoNetwork, if you set it up properly for setup charges, it will automatically do that. It still then comes to a repeat order. Let's say you go to do repeat order and you don't use the exact same original graphic. You upload the same graphic to rebuild that order. It's going to see it as new screens. Your person has to remember if they have it. If you don't have setup charges, you never have to worry about that. It's just a lot easier, and a lot easier to quote as well. Factoring shipping is really tricky, because if you get somehow you got to cover it. And I can't spend a lot of time on that. You're going to have to look at ways, if you think that's of interest, and how you're going to do that. Is it going to be a flat? Let's say you think on average you've got 25 cents per T-shirt is what it costs you to ship. Maybe 50 cents when it's a small order. I suppose in theory you could add that to your print price matrix, and then kind of factor it into the first color so that it's always in there. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. We have a site that does free shipping, and we work as a percentage markup, and we don't always win on that, because on a 12-piece order, you've got to mark up that product considerably in order to cover enough to cover 50, 75 cents in freight and so forth. So I think factoring in having free shipping is great, but gets a lot more difficult to figure out how to factor it into your pricing and not escalate your pricing so much that you look uncompetitive. If someone wanted to talk about theories on that and ideas, I'd be happy to discuss that later. Fast delivery is still a great option for setting up your price strategy. Again, really, your price strategy it really is about, are you going to meet the competition or beat them? But then from there, what's your added benefit? Okay, your pricing's in line with the competition, but why are you better? Okay, we've got no setup charges. That's great, but we deliver in 5 days. Now that's something. Not everybody can deliver in 5 days. So if you're doing a typical, let's say, 2-week turn, you look at your costs and it's like, hey, I can't really get my pricing better. Well, maybe you can increase your prices 10% and figure out something in production so that you can actually deliver, maybe it's not 5 days, but even 1 week, including weekends. Those are some creative ways that do work, and people do it. I have a friend whose whole business is shipping in 3 days. Now, they've got hard and fast rules, but meaning the order goes in, but if they don't do that order approval that day, the day that order comes in, and there's cutoff time, obviously, and if the artwork if the artwork wasn't approved, that's the main factor, or some other thing that they're not providing, all bets are off. It's going to add a day for each day that's delayed. But assuming everything comes in and the artwork's approved by 2 o'clock, they've got a great system where they pound out those orders and have it shipped in 3 days. And then they have options for if they want that it's no charge if it's going to be a regular ground, or if they want it to be overnighted, there's a charge for that, and so forth. So fast delivery is there's just a lot of opportunity there. Incredible quality is worth mentioning. I show here a little picture of a full color process screen print we did years ago. That has been a calling card for our businesses in the past, is the fact that, and we were good at this before DTG came along, but it's still powerful because I don't know how many of you out there are actually doing both screen printing and DTG. DTG is beautiful, but we were printing 120 line screen, and when DTG came along, can we print as good as a DTG machine? No, but we do have great techniques for having color balance and so forth, where someone wants 500 or 1,000 shirts, and we can print that for $1 or $1.50 or $2. You can't do that on a DTG machine. Plus, I can print different blends a lot easier and so forth. So with screen printing, that's been a calling card in being able to duplicate people's art for museums and so forth. And we could charge I don't want to say premium, but we could charge, I guess it's a premium. We could definitely charge more. Now, doesn't mean we didn't lose jobs because people didn't know the difference. There's always that, and I think it's gotten worse in the last decade. People, and probably a lot of that is because of DTG. It's when you get into bigger orders, though, they don't understand why, hey, why can't, we've got someone who's going to print a full color or simulate it for 50 cents cheaper, but they don't really, that's where they got to see the examples either on your website or in hand and really appreciate that. But it's still a calling card. Now, there's going to be other benefits. So I guess to sum up pricing strategy is where are you going to be with your competition? And if you're going to be similar or close, what makes you better? You got to consider that and as part of your marketing pitch and so forth. So now we're going to plug into, we've got 15 minutes, so I know we're running out of time for questions and answer, but I'm willing to stick around for a bit for that because I think this is important. And that's DecoNetwork and covering your bases. So first of all, what is DecoNetwork? If you're using DecoNetwork, you know what it is. If you don't, and you're interested in it, it is a complete system for running your decorating business, including other methods, embroidery, DTG, and setting up those decoration processes and so forth. It lets you key into your suppliers, the main industry suppliers, whether it's Alpha Broder, Sanmar, and you can populate your websites with those products from the back end, what we call the business hub, where you create quotes and orders, ship orders, can manage your production. All the pricing you set up in the system is like a mirror image. Your website's going to be consistent with your back end. When you send quotes, it's going to look up your print tables. So you don't have to sit there and manually calculate your pricing all the time. Once you do the hard work of setting up your system, the system will do that for you. When you change the quantity, when you change the shirt style, it's going to modify that. You also have just a long list of things you can do with managing your production, including production statuses and so forth. I could spend a whole bunch of time telling you how great DecoNetwork is. But to sum that up, is basically we were able to with DecoNetwork, one person can do what 3 to 4 people did before. I say 3 to 4 because it depends on the person, but literally, I know myself. I do quotes, process orders still to this day. It just is so much incredibly faster, especially a repeat order. Copy, change the quantities, and you're off to the races. So the other thing I'm going to get into, though, here about setting up prices in DecoNetwork, I need to explain what an affiliate is if you're not sure. Basically, an affiliate is you can set up multiple stores in DecoNetwork. And those websites can be complicated, or in most cases, they're usually just a simple buy. It's pretty, I'd say that most stores are used by a lot of DTG decorators because they can create their own affiliate stores for themselves or have people create their own affiliate stores and branch out a network of people that are promoting their own designs that you fulfill. So the affiliate store basically allows you to expand your base and let people set up stores, whether you set them up for them or have them set up the stores, and they can create their own decorated products that go into your business hub when those orders are placed, and then you fulfill them. So the DecoNetwork affiliate is basically like a salesperson. It's one way to look at that. Now, what we're going to talk about is how DecoNetwork works with garment markup and your decorating tables, and then what the commission rate and store markup is, and then managing those rates for your fulfillment center versus affiliates. So that's why it's important to kind of understand what's going on with affiliates. And even if you don't have affiliates yet, if you're going to be using DecoNetwork and you want to set up your pricing, you should be thinking about down the road, because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner and then have to reanalyze all this when you realize, hey, I want to have people with websites and they want to make money. And they want a little bit better pricing. So I'll get into that a little bit here. So how does DecoNetwork work with garment markup in your decorating tables? In the simplest example, it takes your shirt cost and you have a store markup, which by default is just a single markup across the board. And it takes that, now it's got a marked up shirt blank price, and then it looks up what the imprint quantity is and how many colors to give a final sale price. So if you go, I've got here listed a print table and the catalog markup. For the catalog markup, this is just a demo store. That would be under your, you go to your products and then you would look at the store product markup tab here. Excuse me, my voice is drying up a little bit here. Apologize for that. And you have a fixed markup. The fixed markup applies to every product in your database, whether you have a limited database of 50 products or if you're using the entire Sanmar catalog or Alpha Broder catalog, thousands of products. it applies that to the whole base. Now you can change that to tiered markup, which allows you to address price points. So for instance, if I wanted to add a few tiers, if you're not aware of this, I could say, all right, for everything up to $5, I'm going to do 50% markup. But when I get over 5, you know, we're going to work on a 40% and so forth. Because maybe you get into the expensive poles and so forth. And if you normally have a 50% markup or even 100% markup, which is not all that uncommon, well, you can't double your money, you feel, at that point. You got to lower the margin on that. And you don't want to, and your decorating tables are what they are, but you got to be competitive. And this is an easy way to do that. I wouldn't recommend doing too many tiers. It can get pretty complicated, but that's how that works. So anyhow, it takes that and, whoops, sorry about that. And I want to look at the price table here. That would be under your decoration process. When you set up your screen printing, you've got a price table. Here's an example. You can set this up for how many ever rows and colors you want. I'm going to give you a quick tip here if you're not aware, but if you look at your price grid, and like many decorators, you charge for each break the same amount as you add colors. In other words, let's keep this real simple. Let's say this is, you know, this is $3, and then for each additional color you add 50 cents. Well, you do not have to do this whole grid like this and build it out, which is a lot more difficult when you want to edit it later. Okay, what you can do is just change this to 2 rows, put in your first color, and then for each additional color, say it's 50 cents. So that way, if they order a 5 color, it knows just to keep adding 50 cents at 25 pieces in this example, keep adding 35 cents and so forth. So a little bit easier to build a table rather than the whole matrix. If it's the same add-on per color per break, you can just do it with 2 rows like that. The white base you can set up as a 1 color, which is what we do. We add a color or a flat rate, and that's all, again, all up to you. So anyhow, that's what the system will do. Once you have your tables in place, and again, this is not a thorough thing, but I will mention this. If you're not aware, make sure that under this last tab in decoration, this is where you tell the system what your default is. So after you set up a table, I believe it's gonna use probably the one you just set up, but you go to screen print pricing, you say price table, and you tell it to use that table. So you want to make sure this is what, be familiar with this decoration pricing, and make sure you then set up a table and it's using another table you had set up previously, for example. So let's get into some of the commission rates in the store markup. This is really tricky for a lot of people. What you want to understand is that the commission rate, I really like to think of it as wholesale. It's effectively what sets your wholesale price, okay? So in this example, we've got a 20% commission, which is the same as or 25% markup. And the wholesale price, what it means is that effectively makes the wholesale price 80%. So what does that mean? That means if you were to look at, and I'll show you where you can find these tabs, because it's a great way to analyze your pricing and trying to figure out how you want to set up your system. And I'm talking about for affiliates here. So in this case, this main part of the product, this is the normal retail price. So let me click on this and give you an example. So here's my apparel, and everything in here is going to, if you look at this pricing, I'll click on this item, and I'll go to pricing. This is taking my, as I showed you earlier, the product markup of 50%. That's the default. You can override that on products, but that's not what we're getting into here. This is, in essence, the fulfillment center retail price is what this sets. By default, when you create a store, it's going to use a store markup to match that. So in other words, even if you tell the, say, set up an affiliate store that gets 30% or 40% commission rather than the default of 20, when that store is created, it's automatically going to fill that void to keep the retail prices the same. It just means you're giving more to the affiliate. So think of as your printing tables that you set up and your garment markup are your full retail price. It's from there that you would discount. It might be what you're going to sell on your website, but that's the full retail price. So it's taking, in this instance, $278 plus that 50% markup at retail. The blank shirt is going to sell for $4.17. And then it gives you a quick scenario of decorating. So for screen printing, it's looking up the first color. It doesn't know in this little example if it's going to be a two-color design, but that's not the point of this. I want to be able to look up and see store pricing. And if I had a bunch of stores, I think we don't in here. It's just this one demo. But let's say that I had affiliate stores and I'm paying them, in this example, 20% commission. Well, as you can see, it's taking my fulfillment center pricing, and the wholesale price is basically 80% of that original wholesale price here, if you do the math. So this $1.83, that 20% commission, is what the affiliate will keep. And then you get the difference. So what you want to be aware of when you're setting up these affiliates is you want to set up your wholesale margin or your commission rates on those stores at a rate that you are comfortable with, that you have retained enough money. So what I'm going to get into here a little bit is thinking about that in advance. And there's several different ways. Let's go to this. So this example, I know the screen looks the same, but I've changed it. I've got a 50% commission that I'm going to pay in this example. And this is actually something we set up with some of our affiliate stores. The brand are decorating and doubled everything so that our fulfillment center was complete 100% full retail. And then let's mark that store up, not the full because that's too high of a price, but let's work on a 40% margin, for example. And where that is on the store level. I'll show you a couple of things here. This is a lot of stuff to cover, I know. You're probably going to have a ton of questions. But if you go into a store, this is an administrative function. So this is not something that your affiliate can edit. This is what you can edit. You can go into your store, there's commission settings, and if, let's say there's a default of 20, and you can plug in and change that number and say, okay, we're going to give them a higher, more profit or less profit or whatever the case is. Then there's also the store markup. So that's different. That controls the sale price. So from their website, I was just down here in administration saying what I'm going to pay that affiliate, what the commission rate is, essentially setting what the bottom line is for me to keep as the fulfillment center owner. But then the affiliate, and most people are doing this for their affiliate because it's just a lot easier to manage sites for your affiliate rather than have them go in here and get confused when we're already confused. You go to price settings, and this is where you do the store markup. So in other words, their base is basically, in this situation, if they have a 20% commission, their base is 20% off your fulfillment center price. By default, it marked it up so it's the retail price. It used a 25% markup to give it back that 20%, if that makes any sense. Well, you can go in and plug in a new value here. If they want to double their money, triple their money, you can set that up for them or let them do it themselves. And believe me, as I'm saying this, I know how confusing it is because it is confusing. But again, what I want you to take home is that when you can set up for each of your affiliates to determine, you need to understand that commission rate is what basically determines the bottom line of that store and what you're going to keep. Above and beyond that, that's all theirs. Mark it up however they want or they want. If they want to make 20% margin, 30, 40, 50, that's fine. I mean, you're going to have to pay them that money, but you've kept what you're going to keep for wholesale. So in this example here, when I showed you on the products, this store has a 50% markup, and and then they want to make a 40% margin. So all it's doing is saying on this retail item, their cost is half, but they don't want to mark it up to full retail. They only want to make it up 40%, and you set that up in the store markup settings. Those are really the two pieces of the puzzle. The key here is if you set up all of your decorating tables price tables and your blank markup, only to the bare minimum for you to go out and sell to the public or business to business, and then all of a sudden, suddenly you decide that you want to, have some people build sites to sell products, maybe even set up a website where they can actually take custom orders just like your site does. Well, they're either going to have to be, your fulfillment center would be the bottom line, and you would not pay them any commission. You could set the store commission to 0 so that their starting point is the same as your normal pricing, and then they mark it up from there. But that's going to probably make them higher price. So it's probably going to be a balance of the two. Off of your normal pricing, you want to take into consideration is, hey, they did all the work of marketing and going out and getting those business, and when those orders are coming right into the hub, I don't have to do anything except process the order. That's got a value. So maybe is that value 10, 20, 30% less than what your normal pricing is? I don't know. That's what you'll have to determine. But if your pricing, again, in the beginning is set up only thinking about what you do, you might not leave any room to really do much price cutting. So that's why I want you to think about that before you set up your complete pricing. Are you going to be having to offer discounts? So the scenario I brought up here is we took everything and doubled it, and then we said that so the wholesale rate is half, and that's how we have our stores set up, and we knew that we're comfortable with half because that was our bottom line. And then we could say, hey, our website, we're going to work at a 30% margin, or we want to do free shipping, so let's make it a 40% margin. And then we can set up these other store types for other affiliates, and working from that, they're going to want to work on a starting point of 30%. They can go higher or lower if they want, but there's a strategy behind it. So let's get into questions and answers. And Victor, I'm going to need your help with this as far as turning all that on.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Then I think I'm going to look into the feed. We're at 3 o'clock. I'm willing to stay on for 30 minutes if you folks are, and keep giving questions.
Awesome, Tommy.